study done that came out this week that suggested that maybe these are misdiagnosed, and so we will be hearing from Minister Shepherd at 2 p.m. today. That will also be on CHCO at 2 p.m. live. So if you do have questions for that, I would love to hear them. Please feel free to reach out on Facebook or in our messages or on the live stream itself, or you can email me directly at news@chco.tv, or also directly to Vicky, VICKI.Hogarth, HOGARTH @chco.tv. Now, right now, I'm currently following online. I see that a lot of CUPE members are following online as well. So if you have your questions that you'd like to write, please feel free to do so. I'm hearing, for instance, Maggie is writing in, ask Higgs how much taxes we're losing because, okay, let's see, trying to read it all as we go along. So there are a lot of questions coming in, but again, please feel free to write them there. I will follow as the conference goes along. It is quite a packed house of journalists, so I'm not sure how many questions we will be able to get. I originally did not think I would be able to attend this conference, so I will be at the end of the conference, so I'll have time to follow your questions online and pivot if you do have anything that doesn't get addressed by the Premier or by the journalists prior to me. Again, there's quite a large number of journalists, and if you are joining us this morning, this is going to be a labor negotiations update with Premier Higgs. Now, as I mentioned, if you're just joining us, CUPE had a press conference at 10 a.m. this morning. Unfortunately, due to one of my own scheduling conference, I was unable to attend the CUPE meeting, so I'm not sure exactly what was said in that news conference, but I'm sure this is something that Premier Higgs will be responding to at the start of this conference. This conference itself was originally scheduled for 11 a.m. It's been pitched back to 11:30, so if you've been following online, that's why there was a time change about an hour ago that pushed this back to 11:30. So again, all the journalists are currently online or in Fredericton in the conference room, and we're waiting for Premier Higgs to arrive. The roll call has already been done, so as soon as we get started, we will go directly into the news conference. Now, I'm trying to follow online with those of you who are in the conference with us here. I'm hearing Bruce in the conference room on the phone as well, so a lot of action going on. I will see you after the conference. Here comes Bruce.
Okay. Good morning. Bonjour. Firstly, I want to speak about the current situation the province is in financially. You know, while we've received good information in terms of how we're recovering and moving forward as a province, and how we're rebounding from COVID in ways I guess we might have thought that weren't possible, and it is certainly seems evident. A lot of that restabilization and move forward was initiated through the federal funding that happened during the COVID year, the main COVID year, and then additional funding supports throughout the pandemic. So I won't give the official update, but I've got a preliminary review of the second quarter results from the Department of Finance and Treasury, and I just received that yesterday. And there's still numbers to be finalized, but our positive trend continues, and we see a stronger second quarter projection going into the new year. And I know we showed a surplus back in our first quarter results, and that surplus will continue. And in fact, it's significantly better than the first quarter. Comme vous le savez, plus tôt au mois d'octobre, nous avons rendu public nos états pour le premier trimestre, et ce résultat montre un surplus. The improvement we saw in the first quarter was a result of additional federal support, much of it one-time in nature. We also benefit from having an economy that has begun to recover earlier than many other provinces, and responsible expenditure management has been, a big part of that as we want to look to the future, living with COVID and beyond, and not saddled future generations in a more dramatic fashion than we certainly already are. Since the first quarter results were finalized, we've received, as I mentioned, another 3 months data. It does show revenue improvements as a result of a report from the Canada Revenue Agency. It's showing that our tax returns are stronger than could have been predicted, and our economy continues to reform strongly this year. We are seeing a larger surplus, as I mentioned, the second quarter, which is largely driven by personal income tax, corporate income tax, and HST. And it is encouraging, the sign that we are seeing a trend of a sustainable economic growth as we recover more quickly than expected from the financial impacts of COVID-19. Il est encourageant de constater une tendance de croissance économique durable, alors que nous rétablissons plus rapidement que prévu des répercussions financières de la pandémie de la COVID-19. Many key economic indicators are now trending at or above their pre-pandemic levels. For example, employment is up 3%, retail sales have increased almost 16%, and manufacturing sales and exports are up approximately 45%. In 2021, we hit a 45-year high for population growth. Our population has grown by 6,000 this year, and we're seeing positive net interprovincial migration for the 5th consecutive year. New Brunswick is indeed on a roll. I have always said that our government is committed to making financially responsible decisions. J'ai toujours dit que notre gouvernement est déterminé à prendre des décisions responsables sur le plan financier. With that in mind, yesterday, despite our medium-term economic outlook, we offered CUPE a wage increase of 2% per year for the next 5 years, 100% salary for casuals, sustainable pension plans for existing plans that are in jeopardy, and the opportunity for a pension plan for those who don't currently qualify for one. Instead, CUPE rejected this offer, asking for 3% a year for the next 4 years, and denied the offer for sustainable pension plans for the members, as well as full pay for casuals working full-time. I ask, is this reasonable? I refer to the comparison that CUPE has posted in relation to what our offer was last night. And I refer to the offer last night because that offer is now off the table. It was something to help us close the deal. It was something that was clearly rejected. And so now it's a new day. So what was offered last night, as I mentioned, we had a 2% for 5 years. CUPE came back with 3% for 4 years. We have many contracts that are already at their 4-year term, and so it would mean that we'd start negotiating again next week with some of the locals. I don't see any real advantage to be in that position. The $500 COVID one-time payment was never part of the CUPE offer. That was an offer that was given to the nurses, but it was not part of this CUPE offer. The 100% for casuals, we have that certainly in place, and that is an $8 million offer that was on the table last night. The pension plan conversion for 2 plans, we currently have 2 plans out of the 7 being discussed here that are not in the shared risk plan. They currently cost in special payments about $7 million a year. They are not sustainable in their current format. We have 5 other locals in CUPE that are in the shared risk, along with 80% or plus 80% of all of the civil service. The plans have not only proven their value and their sustainability, and they've done so through the worst pandemic in history. And they're doing just fine, and they're designed for the future. So we're saying we need to fix the ones that are there, as well as we made an offer last night. We had an offer that basically says we would have the educational assistance, CUPE 2745. There's some in admittance support that we convert to shared risk, but there are a whole lot more of the educational assistants that have no pension at all. And we would incorporate them into the system. And that would be a cost to government of $5.7 million. So when you look across the board, we looked at areas that can not only be beneficial to the employees and the members of CUPE, but also in recognition of the taxpayers and our future ability to pay. I won't be in a position where I cut a deal this year that we can afford this year, but then we can't see a way to pay for it in the out years. I didn't come here to create more liability for the province. I came here to build long-term sustainability. That's why it's important for us to manage within our means, but also to do more with the money that we spend. And while we are rebounding well economically, we still have a high debt level, outstanding infrastructure deficit, a need for transformation in health, education, senior care, and mental health, and addiction care enhancements required. We continue to have more demands on taxpayer dollars while being one of the highest tax provinces in the country. And I don't like that title either. I think that we want to ensure that people have pay fair taxation, but they come here because of what we have to offer in all categories. So faced with the many competing priorities, should we use all our flexibility fiscally on wages alone? I don't believe this is an effective course of action. In our conversations with the Prime Minister previously, there was much discussion about if money was coming from Ottawa for healthcare, if money was coming from Ottawa for other purposes, it couldn't just be used for wages, as nothing was necessarily going to change in making things better for all of New Brunswickers and to get better value for all of taxpayers, because there's so many more demands on us now than there have been in past years. So we have to find that balance, to balance the benefits for all New Brunswickers. We went to the table to negotiate with the union. I obviously don't want to have a strike in the middle of a pandemic. There is zero need to put New Brunswickers at risk, but we can't throw your future away either. The provincial government has recently settled with 3 bargaining groups, including specialized healthcare professionals, professional support in schools and Crown prosecutors, with general wage increases of 8.5% over a 5-year period. And that is fair and reasonable increases, and it demonstrates our province's commitment to workers. Our top priority is to keep New Brunswickers healthy and safe with access to essential services, particularly during this COVID-19 pandemic. Notre principale priorité est d'assurer la santé et la sécurité des gens de New Brunswick et de leur permettre d'avoir accès aux services essentiels, en particulier durant la pandémie de COVID-19. If schools are targeted by strikes, and if our healthcare system is targeted by strikes, this will cause pain and harm the safety and security of New Brunswickers. People's lives are impacted enough right now. We will need to take action to protect New Brunswickers, and that may include the appropriate legislation. I hope this measure will not be necessary. I urge union members to look at what their leaders have rejected. I want all New Brunswickers to be aware. I've consistently looked at building a province for the future. We need to balance our competing priorities, which include affordable contracts with bargaining groups. Our wage package in New Brunswick is about 30% of our total operating cost of the province, so about $3.5 billion. This is a big deal when we make a settlement. CUPE represents 20,000 of the approximately 55,000 employees. The decisions will be made reflective of what we can afford. Les décisions que nous prenons vont être les reflets de ce que nous pouvons nous permettre de payer. We will continue to be careful with taxpayers' money as we build toward a better future. Nous allons continuer d'être prudents avec l'argent des contribuables alors que nous travaillons pour bâtir un avenir meilleur. We can also celebrate the fact that we are now seeing signs of a prolonged trend of economic improvement. The financial picture of our province is looking brighter than it has for a long time, and all New Brunswickers will be able to benefit from this encouraging news. More details will be shared November 12th when our Minister of Finance will release the specifics of the second quarter results. I want to assure everyone that I don't take any decisions lightly, but the decisions I value the most are the ones that every New Brunswicker can see they have a future right here in New Brunswick. And it's important that we're all part of that future. So while I can't predict what the CUPE may ask their membership to do, I do ask for patience from those that will be negatively impacted by potential strike action. We can't have that continue long, and we must protect all of New Brunswickers in the process. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Premier Higgs. Merci. We'll now proceed with questions from the media. Nous allons maintenant procéder avec des questions des journalistes. Each reporter will have one question and one follow-up, and you are invited to ask your question in the official language of your choice. Chaque journaliste aura une question et un suivi, et vous êtes invité à poser vos questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. We'll start with Laura Brown from CTV.
Hi, Premier. I'm wondering about contingency plans specifically for schools and for hospitals. Have you had discussions since yesterday with leaders in those two sectors as to what the plan is moving forward should there be a strike?
Well, not only since yesterday, but prior to that, leading up to the situation. So yes, we have, with all the leaders in the different areas and what impact it can have and what the mitigation efforts would be. And obviously it'll depend on actions taken by the CUPE leadership. However, it's important to know that, you know, we will deal with each issue as it comes along, and we can't have disruption that comes and goes, and you know, you have one issue here and it's kind of all over the province. There has to be a focus that has continuity, no matter which direction it goes in. There has to be some continuity for parents in the case of schools, and for certainly in the case of hospitals, that we can ensure that we provide the healthcare service needed.
A little bit more specifics. Are you prepared to move some government workers to those sectors should you need to? So in the case of maybe civil servants going to, you know, work at hospitals?
Well, I think that the job one will be to ensure that we can protect New Brunswickers. Health and safety would be first and foremost. So if you say, in the case of hospitals, we will do whatever we can, particularly in an emergency. We are under an emergency order situation right now. So, you know, here we are in a pandemic under an emergency order situation. And that the purpose of emergency order is to protect health and safety of residents of the province. So if that becomes a risk, then we will do what is necessary to minimize that risk.
Thank you, Premier. Thank you, Laura. Merci. Next question, Jean-François Boisbert, Lac des Nouvelles.
Oui, j'aimerais savoir, M. Higgs, vous avez dit tantôt que l'offre n'était plus sur la table pour le syndicat de la fonction publique et pour ses membres. Qu'est-ce qui est sur la table présentement? Est-ce que vous avez des plans pour mettre quelque chose, des propositions à faire?
No, I do not have anything further to propose. We put a very fair offer together, you know, especially when you're considering the casuals, that going from 80 to 100%. When you consider us offering a pension program for those that don't have it, as well as fixing the pension for a long-term sustainability for those that for the couple of locals that do have and has not been fixed. So but the settlement that we've seen from the others and the other groups, you know, that is the wage settlement that makes sense for the province. And we did our best last night to put enough on the table to have the discussion finish and conclude and not get into a strike. But it obviously wasn't good enough. And we certainly got the impression with CUPE that with the leadership, it's never good enough. So it came to a point that we had to say, okay, I guess, you know, we both, they didn't accept our offer, and it's a new day.
Monsieur
D'accord,
Boisvert,
mais maintenant, oui,
Allez-y.
s'il n'y a plus de... Oui? OK. S'il n'y a plus rien sur la table, comment pensez-vous qu'on sera en mesure d'éviter une grève s'il n'y a plus de propositions?
Well, I would say the ball's clearly in CUPE's court. So they know what we made for offers to the other unions. They know what the other unions have accepted. And we're certainly prepared to share completely our financial situation. You know, I see different, you know, economists who will write about what they think the situation is in our province. And you know, as I said earlier, I could make an agreement now that might be fine for this year. But the issue is we're talking 55,000 employees ultimately, and 20,000 are in these discussions. You know, so everything we do is a big ticket item. And therefore, I have to make decisions based on the long haul. And I'm prepared, though, to anyone who wants to review our finances in the province. And if they want us just to take maybe a whole different approach and say, excuse me, it doesn't matter. Tax whatever you want, spend whatever you want, because we know there are governments that do that. But the taxpayers end up footing the bill.
Merci.
Premier, merci Jean-François. John Chillibeck, Brunswick News.
Hi there. I'm just not clear on these negotiations where the breakdown was, because seemingly both sides were inching towards an agreement and getting closer. So why break off the talks when you're that close to an agreement?
Well, I guess, John, if you think that close is to an agreement. So we have had no movement whatsoever on addressing the pension shortfalls. The 7 million of special payments being made to two groups that we have a definite path to fix has been a non-discussion item from CUPE. The offer that we would include another group that doesn't even have a pension, so that they would be able to contribute to a pension, has not even been a consideration by CUPE. They've only ever talked about wages. I reiterated the one-time payment. That was never on the table for CUPE, so I'm not sure why that showed up on their comparison. So I'm not sure how you define close, but it's more than simply the actual percentage increase. And we did go beyond last night, where we have gone with the other unions and have accepted contracts in an effort to get a deal. And still we saw no movement on those items that are unsustainable at this point, and there have shown no interest to address.
I'm just seeking clarity also on the emergency decree, because I thought my understanding was it does give the government the power to call off a strike, or do you have to pass special legislation if you want to go that route like you had suggested just a few minutes ago?
I think you are correct. To my understanding would be that under an emergency order, where, you know, certain conditions would be met in terms of the impact on society, then yes, we could, through a cabinet directive, exercise an emergency order in order to avoid a strike and get people back to work. The normal, I guess, process, because you wouldn't normally be in an emergency order, would be through the legislation.
Thank you, John. Jacques Poitras, CBC.
Jacques, I'll take his question if it's not there.
Jacques? Okay.
Sorry, I was double muted.
No problem. Go ahead.
Just following up on John's question, not to get into the weeds, but the emergency order would be the faster route. So I'm not clear which one you sort of are leaning to, if you're indeed leaning to one or the other.
I'm not leaning in any direction at this point, because CUPE have not demonstrated that they've only said a strike is imminent. I guess we will determine what's required and how quickly it's required based on their actions in the workplace and the impact it has on New Brunswickers.
Just on this pension, this, I guess, trade-off in terms of getting one of their units into the pension plan in return for shared risk. You're talking about these special payments, but what's the net cost or saving to government of all of those things happening if they were to happen?
And I'm just looking here. Jacques, excuse me one moment. I have that with me. The actual current cost right now of the two plans through a special payment that are made to keep them funded, because we're currently not funding those. We have been funding them all along. The current payment is $6-7 million per year. If we add the conversions of 2745, that will be an added cost to government of $5.7 million per year. So, the net is like $1.3 million. That would be a cost benefit to government.
Thank you, Premier. Thank you, Jacques. Sarah Davy, Radio-Canada.
Oui, c'est poursuivre justement sur les questions des étapes, les prochaines étapes, là, parce que le syndicat était assez clair ce matin que ça pouvait être déclenché d'une minute à l'autre. Donc, est-ce que vous vous préparez, si c'est déclenché, à tout de suite avec le emergency order de les obliger à retourner travailler?
Yes, you're correct. We can do that through the emergency order, but I think it's important to realize that we have to assess under that, because no one wants to be in a position of taking advantage of an emergency order. But on the other hand, you'd say, who would go on a strike in a pandemic when the province is under an emergency order? So we would have to look at the conditions under which they were impacting the daily lives of New Brunswickers, and then decide what is the recourse. So I won't prescribe one or the other. I think all I would say is that we would assess it at the time of understanding what they're actually doing and the impact, and how we best must protect the health and safety and welfare of our citizens.
Merci. Dernière question. Le syndicat vous reproche que le salaire qui a été proposé hier, la hausse, ça ne suivait même pas le coût de la vie. Dans le contexte des surplus budgétaires, ils trouvent que ça ne tient pas la route. C'est quoi que vous leur répondez?
Well, I would say that we did a comparator, and we actually put that public probably a month ago now or so. And it showed the cost of, what we have here in government related to hourly rates. If you look at the whole pensions, the benefits that go with that, 240 days of accumulated sick time, it's more than just any one item. But when you compare it across the board in private sector, the comparisons were pretty stark that the employees are well paid. And so let's start there and say, okay, how do we compare? Because we said in these discussions that we were prepared to look at particular, let's say, positions that were not in step with what we saw elsewhere, that were critical locations. And I refer to the ones in the nursing field that we've said that directly to nurses, that we wanted to, and part of the deal was that we wanted to reflect a comparative salary. So in certain professions, that could apply to CUPE as well. And how many, I don't know at this stage, but the idea was that we wanted to be, comparable as needed to ensure that people felt that they were being treated fairly here in New Brunswick, and I guess that they would certainly stay and work here in New Brunswick.
Premier, merci Sarah. Adam Harris, Brunswick News.
Thanks, Tyler. Premier, I've got a couple questions on another subject. Wanted your thoughts on the new Trudeau cabinet, specifically Dominic LeBlanc's appointment as infrastructure minister and Jeanette's appointment to ACOA.
Well, I'm looking forward to my continued positive relationship with Mr. LeBlanc. You know, we've had our moments, and I guess you could say we both have created those moments. So we can all share in that. But we have many priorities in our province. As a senior minister in the Trudeau government, I mean, he can make a tremendous difference. And for me to suggest otherwise, or to indicate that I really, you know, really it wouldn't be necessary, would not be appropriate, because it is necessary that he and I work out the best path forward to invest in infrastructure that's needed in our province, that will make a difference as people view New Brunswick. And I think there's a lot of common areas that we can share in that regard.
Just a follow-up, you alluded to it. Infrastructure is a file you haven't really seen eye to eye on with Dominic. Do you think this changes the dynamic at all? Does he have any leverage to persuade you now to potentially take some projects the federal government wants to do in order to do some things that you'd like?
Well, I mean, I have always been, my issue's always been around flexibility in which projects, and it's flexibility that are going to build, you know, capability within our infrastructure, but more importantly, deal with our current infrastructure and building that reliability that are expenses that must be incurred. The idea of having not to build something to create employment, meaning creating employment while it's being built, but to build something that's going to have a long-term impact in a community or an area, because it's something that's really needed as a visionary way to improve the region. Probably the fundamental concept is indifference has always been in many cases the thirst to build something just to create employment, which is always build something more, because it's a taxpayer employment program, versus strategic spending that's going to create a difference in New Brunswick. And you know, you can refer to different projects. I would reference one like the Funny Trail as an example, and then spin-offs come. You could go all around the province and say what are going to be game-changing investments that are going to cause people to look at our province, visit our province, build and invest in our province, because we are seeing a shift in private sector investment, and I want to continue those trends. I do not want to be, as a government, the employer just to spend money on something in order to create a job for as long as the money is there.
Thanks. Premier, thank you, Adam. Vicki Hogarth, CHCO-TV.
Thank you, Tyler. Premier Higgs, you said last night's offer is off the table. What does that mean exactly? And was there any room for meeting halfway between what the province offered and what the ask was?
No, we're not going higher. You know, we have, I guess, what that means is that we have other unions that we've accepted with, the wages are already defined, and I think we need to settle back into that area, because CUPE has clearly indicated an unwillingness to move in other fronts, and so that's kind of what I mean by it.
How do you respond to critics who say that a budget surplus at this time is unacceptable?
Well, I would ask those critics to come in and look at our finances. You know, it's easy to criticize outside and kind of make opinions, but I'd be more than willing to share and have a financial analysis done of our province and to look at the next, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 years and what we can anticipate and how we manage that, because so often our government has made a decision based on their time in office and how that decision will keep them in office. Well, at this point in time, you have a government that is much more interested in having a province that has a future than my future in office. Because it's, to me, if we can't build our strengths and do it together because we recognize we must, then what's the point? And so I would say, we'll open the books, let anyone who wants to criticize or have an opinion meet with our finance folks, look at our numbers. When we have a one-time, you know, or a surplus that we don't know is sustainable or not, and when you think of the surplus, I mean, think about the 3 or 4% of what it means to our total budget. It's, do I spend that 200 or 300 million all in one spot and then hope the best for year 2 and 3? Or do I try to find a way that matches that over time? There is no excuse for a province like ours that depends 2 to 3 billion on transfer payments to allow itself to be in a position that is so vulnerable as we have been over the years. We are seeing the recovery. We're seeing interest. We can't lose this momentum. Anything short of that would be irresponsible.
Premier, thank you. Vicky, Natalie Sturgeon, Global.
Premier, I'm just wondering if you can clarify. I know you mentioned what was offered and sort of what was countered, but can you clarify what the sticking point was yesterday that caused the government to walk away from the table?
Well, firstly, I'd like to clarify who walked away from whom. I mean, I guess the first one that gets out with the communique gets to set the pace on that. So, I could have been out earlier or last night and said, CUPE unwilling to protect employees' pension plans. Even though 5 of their 7 members that are part of this are in a protected plan that's worked very well. So that could have been a showstopper, because it is a showstopper. And it's one that must be addressed in these negotiations because it needs to be. And there has been absolutely no interest of any kind shown in not only providing a pension for those that don't have it, but in fixing the ones that do have it, so they are sustainable, not borne solely by the taxpayers in order to stay afloat, but are fixed economically so that they indeed can be managed and are there when the people need it. And our economy is changing in our country. I mentioned the transfer payments because with the state of the federal government now, I don't know what it's going to look like a few years down the road. I said many years what was going to happen when the Alberta economy, when it really got to the state that it's in now. Where does the money come from for the federal coffers? Are we going to see Quebec turn into the funding model that's going to help the rest of the country, as Alberta has done for years? I don't know. I just haven't been able to get an answer to that question, and I am concerned, and therefore I want to make our province as viable as I possibly can while I'm here to make that difference.
Natalie, do you have a follow-up? Go ahead.
Yes, I do, Tyler. Thank you. So if CUPE was to hit the picket line this week, you would use your powers within the emergency order to legislate them back to work?
Yeah, I said that I would use whatever means I have in order to protect and limit the impact on the citizens of this province, especially when we are in the pandemic and that we have an emergency order in place. We must ensure that we minimize any further impact on our citizens.
Thank you, Premier. Thank you, Natalie. Hadil Ibrahim, CBC.
Thanks, Tyler. Premier, wages will eventually have to meet inflation and cover cost of living. So if now is not a good time, when would be the best time to start on that road?
Well, I think if you look at the current offer, you can see that, what we're proposing going forward and what we project for the cost of living over the next 3 or 4 years. I know there's a spike right now, but it certainly settles down. We expect the growth of the province to settle down. And that's the issue. We expect our growth to settle back, and because we're coming out of a negative growth period. So we expect it is high right now, but that's not going to continue for 3 or 4 years. At least that's what the economists would tell us. Or some economists. I expect that, there's many that would probably say something differently. But the point is, again, let's do a comparator of the full wage package that's being offered. So, if you start at a level that's higher than the private sector or higher than the comparative options for government, then you need to consider that and say, well, why would I be doing this if I'm in a position that I have to cause taxpayers more expense in order to provide the same service? That's always the question we have to ask. So every service we provide in government, we all should be looking at that. CUPE members, any union, we all should be looking at that and saying, okay, are we delivering this in the best possible manner so that we provide the best wages we can and we deliver the best service we can?
Thanks. And if you don't want to use the province's flexibility that you mentioned on wages, what do you want to use it for to make things better instead?
Well, you say flexibility. So what
Your words, Premier.
Yeah, well, my flexibility that I talked about was in terms of the what I referred to as terms of the federal spending and the infrastructure, and that we needed flexibility in how the money was spent for new projects. We needed that from the federal government. When I talk about that was, it's my reference to flexibility was I wanted to have the ability to, fix things that needed to spend money on as opposed to something new that wasn't necessarily a priority. In the case of, our current spending right now, you'd say, okay, how do I make in this time frame, and we're running a surplus because of federal money, will it be sustainable? Can I do long-term benefits? Can I reduce taxes? Can I reduce the property taxes? And then we've talked about the rental incomes, and if the taxes were lower would the tenants rent actually reduce? So can we do more in the healthcare field and provide better services? If you just put money in wages and you continue to do the same thing you've always done, what has changed? And that's my point. And I've said many times with CUPE members directly, but really with all unions, is we need your help. We're all paying the same tax bill. So let's kind of get out and break the mold of what we've got stuck into and say, what would you do differently in the job you're in? And just let's do it. Because I've always been, I guess, and I can go right back to my first budget speech when I was in finance. And I said, wow, this is such a different world than what I came from. Because, I was working for a company and you're focused on staying employed, but you're focused on profits. But here, I'm focused on better healthcare, better education, better lifestyle, better roads, better social systems, better housing, all these things that are so meaningful. So every employee that's working for government should, and I would say many do, have the same mission at heart. So when we all are on the same page, why can't we do what is reasonable in the sense of what's fair and comparable and how we deliver a better service? And I believe a better service is there to be delivered.
Premier, final questions from Richard Sina from CPAC. Richard? Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. That concludes today's news conference. Merci tout le monde. C'est conclu notre conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
That concludes this morning's update on labor negotiations with Premier Higgs. I will be back here again today at 2 p.m. for another press conference. This time it will be with Minister of Health Dorothy Shepherd. It's not a COVID-19 update. It will be on the mysterious neurological syndrome that we've been hearing a lot about, and an update on that. So I will see you back here at 2 p.m. I'm Vicki Hogarth at the CHCO News Desk.
This has been a news and public affairs production of CHCO-TV, New Brunswick's only source for independent community television.